when you're leading a large team and you're leading a large revenue stream, you can't only be looking inward. You need to understand the environment that you exist in. Like, really important to be looking. My job as a VP is to be looking 2 years down the road, not 2 weeks down the road. So I wake up every morning and I listen to 5 or 6 podcasts, and I make sure that I'm getting a really broad view of international and American news. So probably the most important thing I listen to is the FT, which makes sure that I am getting outside of American news and really understanding what's happening in the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Travel Trends Season 6. This is your host, Dan Christian, and today we're going to continue our deep dive into In-Destination Experiences Part 2, which is kindly sponsored by our friends over at Pernod Ricard, who share our passion for authentic experiences and shaping the future of immersive travel. You can find out more information about all their brand homes at pernodricard.com. Now, on today's episode, we are moving from one of the most revolutionary in-destination experience companies in Meow Wolf that you heard from last week to the largest global marketplace for in-destination experiences with the VP of Marketing for Viator, Laurel Greatrix. Now, next week, we're going to have the founder of GeoTourist, which is an app that augments the in-destination experience to round out this series. And we also have several tours and activities providers lined up for our AI Summit October 28th and 29th. So make sure that you register to join us. You can find out more information at traveltrendspodcast.com. And that's where you can also find a special promo code to join us and the team from Viator and TripAdvisor at Focusrite in San Diego in November. The promo code will give you $250 off your ticket, and it guarantees you a feature in our event Spotlight. Now, let's welcome another captain of industry to Travel Trends, Laurel Greatrix, the VP of Marketing from Viator. Welcome, Laurel. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I really wanted to have you as part of this opening series of Season 6 as part of our Captains of Industry. You and I have met a number of times, have gotten to know each other. I've been so impressed with what you've accomplished in your career and obviously the success trajectory of Viator. And I think most of our listeners certainly are familiar with Viator. So today's conversation is really going to be about your career and Viator, because I see the two very intertwined. And you always stood out to me as someone that, despite various changes in the organization, just continued to deliver. And I think our audience has seen that from the results of Viator. So in many ways, I see you as the unsung hero of Viator. And I think that you've got so much to offer our listeners and people in the industry. Also as a strong female executive, and the first female executive that's a part of Season 6. And when we talked about the Captains of Industry theme as a team, that was something that was so important for us, is that we didn't want Captains of Industry to be like, look like male pilots. Like, that's what people picture of Captains of Industry. That's not my view of the industry. And obviously, I'm really keen to have this conversation with you. So let's give all of our listeners a bit of background. Tell everyone, I know you're in London today and kindly joining us for this recording, but you're based in Boston, but you're actually also Canadian. You're undercover Canadian living in the US. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into travel, and how you ended up in Boston.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that introduction. I think you're probably, maybe other than my dad, the first, last, and only person to describe me as a captain of industry, but I will take it. Thank you very much for such a warm intro. Yes, so as you said, I am Canadian, and I now live in the US, but I got into travel very, very intentionally. Sort of as a kid, I didn't travel much. You grew up in Ontario, so you'll know how it goes, but I spent most of my childhood vacations being piled into a minivan and driving from average beach to average beach. So by the time I was graduating university, I was just like bursting with desire for adventure. So I ended up leaving the country, Canada, for Taiwan 2 days after my last final exam, and I never really came back. I mean, I came back for periods of a couple of months, but I've really lived abroad since I was about 22 or 23. So as I said, I went to Taiwan for a couple of years. I did some backpacking, and over that time, I worked out that I really, really wanted to work in travel. So I got what was a truly, truly dreadfully paid job working at a PR agency in London on hotels and DMOs and airlines and travel tech, and I was able to afford lunch maybe twice a week then. But I loved it, and I never really looked back. So I was in the agency world for a couple of years, and then I ended up in TripAdvisor in the 2010s, and that was really where my career changed quite a bit. I was never really on the core business. I got sort of immediately put into the growth categories. So I was in vacation rentals at the time that Airbnb was making a name for itself, or was like really kind of completely reinventing the category. And then I got into Viator the moment that experiences really exploded. And so our teams back then were pretty small. It meant all hands on deck for everything that we were doing. Took me way outside of my roots in comms and marketing. And it really was a combination of, yes, hard work, but there was a lot of right place, right time, amazing people, amazing product. And, I look back on it now, I'm still in it. And I can't, this is a professional experience I never would have imagined back when I was writing listicles in a PR agency that I would just be so deeply ashamed to review again today. But it's been just an unbelievable trip at TripAdvisor and Viator. I've worked with unbelievably intelligent people on really, really cool problems, and I am just really grateful I've gotten to do what I've gotten to do. And as I said, never would have expected that this is how it would have all panned out, but it did, and I love it.
No, that's fantastic. And I certainly, one of the things we hear as Canadians is like the world needs more Canada. And I think you're a great example of that, because you left and never came back. And I think the travel industry is certainly better for it. And yes, the listicle era that you lived in London, like this is why, I find it really interesting, your career trajectory, because you have worked your way up. And I think that is something that, especially our younger listeners, that instantly look at someone like yourself and are like, I want that job. That looks incredible. It's like, well, actually, there's about 15 years of really hard yards that you have to get into that position that give you the credibility, the experience, and everything else to be able to drive a team of like 80 people that you're now running. And
I do feel like you're like sometimes not allowed to say that a lot of it really does come down to hard work, but a lot of it really did just come down to extremely long working days and working weeks. And, not everyone needs to be putting in 60, 70-hour weeks. But the thing I found that really worked for me was that I was always doing things I really loved. And so, yes, the working weeks were long, the hours were long, the days were long, the travel was extensive. But, not to sound too cheesy, I always really, really enjoyed it. And that made the hard work feel a little bit less like hard work. But yeah, it's kind of an unpopular take, but putting in the hours really was pretty important to moving on up.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I wanted to emphasize that, because, I was at Lonely Planet when you were at TripAdvisor, and we saw the world at that time as sort of those were the two arch rivals. You had editorial content against user generated content. And there was sort of the battle between the CEOs at the time. We kind of know how that played out with Lonely Planet being acquired, TripAdvisor, and then TripAdvisor ultimately buying Viator. And this was another part that I think is really interesting about your story and background, is that you were at TripAdvisor for nearly 10 years before you then moved over to Viator. So tell us a little bit, I guess, for our listeners, if anyone's not familiar with TripAdvisor and Viator, just give everyone a little bit of like an overview of those two organizations and how that transition came to be for you. Because I'll just highlight one thing, is that from the TripAdvisor Viator acquisition, and it really became the jewel in the crown, and it's been driving a lot of the success, growth, and profitability. And now that's been kind of revealed, and now everyone knows that. And there was you 4 years ago transitioning into that role, and then seeing the comeback from the pandemic. But yeah, give everyone a little bit of an overview, if you wouldn't mind, of those two organizations, and then what your role is.
Yeah, so TripAdvisor and Viator. I mean, TripAdvisor's been around since 2020, since 2000. Viator since I think it was 1995, but I think it was 2012 or 2013, might have actually been 2014, when we acquired Viator. And the thinking at that time was that TripAdvisor had this unbelievable traffic asset, 500 million people a year using TripAdvisor to plan their trips. And we had all of these things to do pages, but there was very little commercial oomph or commercial power to them. So we looked at Viator, and at the time, experience was growing. It wasn't growing like it is now, but Viator had this amazing supply asset. I say that now. I think it had 10 or 20,000 products when we acquired it, and now it's 400,000. So that tells you where this has gone. But back then, we looked at this and thought, that's amazing. Like, let's acquire Viator. We will take this growth asset, or rather this traffic asset, and this supply asset. We will smash them together, and magic will be made. And that is kind of not exactly what happened right away. So we acquired Viator. We did sort of quite immediately integrate it, but the magic didn't happen as quickly as we thought. And sort of what we realized is that there was a lot of power in the Viator brand name and in the Viator traffic asset. And so as much as we thought, supply was the magic of Viator. It was actually the whole product. So in those initial years, what we did was we really focused on selling experiences through the TripAdvisor point of sale. And this was around the time that Airbnb entered the category. Get Your Guide was growing really quickly. Klook came to be. And what we started to learn was that these single vertical OTAs really did speak very, very well to travelers. So around this time, we thought, okay, certainly TripAdvisor has this amazing traffic asset, but probably there is there is an unsung hero in the Viator traffic asset as well. So we started reinvesting into the Viator brand, building our supply, and using both points of sale, both TripAdvisor and Viator, and as well as our partnerships to really grow the business. And I think that was the point that things really, really took off. It was 2020 or 2021, post-pandemic, we came out, we had these two assets, and we were just able to absorb so much of the post-pandemic bounce. I think we grew something like 200% the first year of the pandemic. It was like 200, then 150, then 50, and it was just year after year after year as a result of this. God, I really hesitate to use the word synergy because it sounds so U.S. corporate, but that's kind of what it was. It was just the power of Viator, this single vertical experiences of OTA combined with TripAdvisor and this, massive traffic asset, this exclusive partnership that gave us and our operators access to hundreds of millions of travelers that the competition would, love to have access to. And it was a combination of these things combined with the partnerships that really, and amazing execution by the teams, but that really saw us come out of the pandemic with so much power. So that's been the story over the last few years. And then I think as time goes on, we see more and more the advantage and the power and the partnership of TripAdvisor and Viator. I think it's got to be one of travel's most successful partnerships. And the thing we're looking at next is how we take that even further, how we can combine our marketing functions and our product functions to really make sure these two products are learning from each other as much as they can. And then the data part's really interesting, where we just have so much access to what travelers are doing because of what they're doing on TripAdvisor, and really leveraging that to serve them as best we can, and make the most of that competitive advantage.
For sure. And I definitely want to get into that because, as you mentioned, with the competitive landscape has increased with companies like Get Your Guide and Klook, as you called out. And Get Your Guide, for our listeners, I just heard from Tao Tao last week, and now they're having a chance to hear from you. And most of our listeners would have also heard from a friend of yours, Rod Cuthbert, the founder of Viator. And one of the things I wanted just to call out too is that when I had spoken to Steve Kaufer after they acquired Viator, I was speaking to him at the Skiff conference in New York. And one of the comments he made is that we are still digesting the acquisition of Viator at the time, because there had been some challenges initially. Just after the acquisition happened, there was a bit of a data breach and there were some issues, and all of a sudden, things went a little bit quiet. And then Viator has been this building, not producing some of the earnings reports. And all of a sudden, once they do, everyone's kind of go, oh my God, this is the best kept secret within TripAdvisor, to the point where there's been people calling to spin off Viator and go public on its own, and unlock this value. So and the reason I wanted to highlight that to all of our listeners as well is because the opening conversation of season 6 was with Chris Hemmeter, one of the biggest VCs in the industry, of course. And he highlighted in our conversation that there's never been a better time to be investing in travel. And so what I find really fascinating about Viator being acquired for $200 million, now you guys are doing over $1 billion in sales, is that, and what the next 5 years look like. Yeah. It's amazing, the growth and the potential. So, but I want to keep on your experience, because one of the things I discovered getting to know you over the last year was that we both went to the same university. We were actually went to Western. So you finished Western and left. We never met while you were there. But I think it's really cool that you have that background and experience. So as a Canadian that has that background and experience, one of the things I've often heard from other fellow Canadians that go on to international success is that they actually have a global view. And so the fact that you actually wanted to go to Asia and then to London, there's a strong desire for international travel and to really know the world and to have a global perspective. I'm very curious to know, is that part of your background and upbringing? Is it just a natural instinct for you? But why did you gravitate to, being in such a global role? Because clearly you thrive on it. So what do you think is behind some of your success besides hard work?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't really know where the travel bug came from. I certainly didn't grow up with it. I mean, the first flight I got on, I think I was maybe 12 or 13, and it was Thunder Bay, Ontario. So it's not like I was jet setting and doing all these amazing things. I don't know, maybe 16 or 17 when I first left the country. And maybe it was the lack of that that got me so interested in it. But from the moment I left, it's not that I love Canada and I'd be honored and delighted to live there again, but I just sort of knew that I would probably spend my life from going from place to place. So it's really hard to say what got me there. But once I was there, I knew I really, really wanted to do it. So when I was living in Taiwan, I knew I was going back to Toronto to do my postgraduate. I didn't even consider looking for an internship in Toronto. I found one in London. And then once I was in London, there was a lot going on in the Singapore office. So I asked for the move to Singapore and I got that. And then the business was moving back to Boston at that time. It was vacation rentals. And that seemed like another really interesting opportunity. So more than anything, I would say it was almost that I didn't have a plan. I just sort of said yes to, and I never really had a destination in mind. I never thought I want to be the VP of marketing, I want to be the VP of comms, or I want to be head of strategy. I just thought I want to keep doing interesting things. And that was such an easy thing to come by at TripAdvisor in the mid 2010s. There was so much growth. We had all these global offices, and I said yes to kind of everything that came my way that looked interesting. And I didn't think too much about where it was taking me, as long as I knew it was advancing my thinking and my career and I was getting access to really interesting people. So I would say probably more than anything, it was just like a strong sense of adventure. And at the time I didn't have a child, so it was quite easy. It was quite a bit easier to do then than it would be now with a very particular 6-year-old in tow wherever I go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned that, say yes to everything, because it was actually one of the themes of our Vanessa, who I worked with in Australia. She's gone on to incredible success living in Dubai. And last time I saw her post on the weekend, she was flying in a private jet and commenting about her vision board. And if anyone wanted to know, but she literally was, her approach post-pandemic was say yes to everything. And so I even think that mentality, which is very much a growth mindset, is obviously key to success, like finding interesting things that you want to do, working hard at them, showing results, and then you keep getting better at your craft. So, but tell us a little bit. So your role at Viator, tell us a little bit about your function in the business, because the reason I want to highlight that is because, I've known some of the CEOs at TripAdvisor who've all been terrific. And I know some of your, quite a few of your colleagues, of course, and everyone greatly respects and admires you. And the reason I say that is because, Pepijn is now the head of Viator, who's going to be a great new leader for the business as well. But he's coming in from his experience with Booking.com. You're one of the people that has, come up in TripAdvisor running Viator. And so we see all this success and we see some of the other executives on stage, but you're the one driving the marketing campaigns and a lot of the initiatives that keeps the engine really running.
Oh, I mean, as much as I'd love to take credit for everything you just said, I really, really cannot. There's a whole group of us, probably 5 or 6 of us who've grown up together and have worked together for years. And as much as I am running marketing now, we're all very much in each other's business. And it really is like a true partnership with a core group of us who've been together for quite some time. So thank you. It's a lovely thing to say, but I cannot single-handedly take credit for that. In terms of what the role is, it is my team and I lead marketing for Viator. So it's everything from what is the value proposition to how do we say that in words and images. So what do we look like and what do we sound like, to the channels we execute it in. So all of our distribution. Retention is the part where there's crossover between us and R&D. So that's probably the handoff point. We lead CRM and customer value management. But at that point, that's where the partnership really sees us hand the customer off to the team that runs the storefront. And then in addition to that, we have the functions that enable you to run a marketing organization at global scale and produce everything you need for it. So communications, analytics, and content. So it's a large, global, incredibly talented team that I feel very lucky to work with. And sometimes I actually can't believe anyone trusts me with it, but it's going very well so far. Great bunch of people. And, as I said when we started, I kind of sometimes can't really believe I'm here. And I feel so lucky to get to do what we do and to work with the people that I do.
Well, one thing you obviously highlighted, and again, you're absolutely right about the team and the people you bring together, and so rightly, obviously, to acknowledge everyone that you've worked with for many years that have established this strong team that keeps producing these exceptional results. And I think one of the things as a marketer, and certainly from my experience, is that if you have a great product and especially a great user experience, like the stars have to align as well. You can't be successful in marketing, or at least for very long, if the product doesn't stand up, people are having lousy experiences, and like it's not sustainable, it's not going to work. So you're absolutely right that the entire organization needs to be, you need to be firing on all cylinders for marketing to be as powerful as it is. So tell us a little bit about Viator. One of the things I always like to ask travel companies is like competitive advantages. What are some of the things that are, your USPs, unique selling propositions that's truly unique about Viator? And the reason I also wanted to ask you that question is because I've often over the years used Viator as a site to compare to with other companies in terms of 24-hour cancellation or the customer service commitment that you're offering, the selection, like the things that you call out as kind of the core USPs for people who are just trying to understand. For example, my father-in-law recently was trying to book a sumo experience in Japan on his trip.
That is a wildly popular experience, by the way.
Well, and in this instance, he booked it, and then he was nervous that he was it wasn't, and he was like, "Have you ever heard of this company called Get Your Guide?" And I was like, "Yes." And I'm like, "You should have asked me. Like, just ask me." There's like, "Yes, do you know about Viator? Do you know like?" So it's amazing how many travelers are just not familiar with OTAs and where they should be buying these experiences. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what differentiates Viator against a much more fierce competitive set. I know you guys have been around longer, you have many experiences globally, but what are some of the attributes that you as a marketer for that brand tend to kind of focus on and how you approach your marketing and messaging?
I think it's really easy to look at OTAs in any category and say they're all a little bit similar and they're not that differentiated, but there actually are some pretty big differences. Probably the biggest one, or not probably, definitely the biggest one is our catalog. We have 400,000 experiences all over the world. So, it's everything from the kind of mass market walking tours, hop on, hop off, to really niche stuff like perfume making in Paris, to high adventure stuff like canyoning and caving. So it really runs the gamut. So we have everything that's the really kind of new niche experiential stuff, all the way through to the stuff that there's no way you would, go to Paris and not go up the Eiffel Tower or take a Seine River cruise. So I'd say it's the breadth of inventory is one, like by quite a margin. We have more inventory than anyone else in the market. So Viator's catalog is really quite compelling, quite unique, quite different. And it is probably our biggest competitive advantage. The second thing I would say is the TripAdvisor partnership. So from a supply perspective, what I just talked about on catalog is what's great for travelers. In terms of what's good for suppliers, it's the partnership with TripAdvisor. We're the exclusive partner to TripAdvisor. We are able to distribute our partners on this absolutely vast and beloved travel website that really expands the audience that they can access, alongside our partnerships program, which is also very broad. So the TripAdvisor partnership for our operators, huge competitive advantage, enormous benefit of distributing through Viator. And then in addition to that, on the TripAdvisor partnership, there is the sort of like 360-degree view of a traveler that we have that others may not. So we probably know before others in the market where a traveler is going, what their dates are, how long they're going for, and that allows us, or should allow us, to really personalize and make highly specific recommendations in a truly competitively advantaged way. And then the third thing I'd say is just market experience. We've been leading in the US for such a long time. We have a really, really deep understanding built on a foundation of 20 years of experience in the US, and that allows us to serve the American consumer very, very well. And of course, it's diversification is a thing. It's not necessarily that difficult to launch in a different market, but it is easy to underestimate the experience and the muscle a company builds after that long leading in a market, and that is something that truly differentiates us.
We'll be right back. PayCompass is the leading merchant processor built specifically for the travel industry. PayCompass makes it easy for travel businesses to get approved with high processing limits, so operators and agencies can scale without barriers. They deliver some of the highest authorization rates in the industry, backed by powerful chargeback mitigation services that protect revenue and reputation. Plus, with tools like virtual cards, PayCompass helps travel brands manage payments smarter and more efficiently. Simply put, PayCompass isn't just a processor. They're helping travel businesses grow stronger and faster. Got clients who want to travel, but none of their friends can? Meet WeRoad, one of the hottest travel scale-ups, named by Financial Times-backed Sifted FT 2 years running among Europe's fastest-growing startups. They create community-driven small group trips, where about 90% start solo and come back with new friends. All departures are coordinator-led and easy for advisors to package because flights aren't included. You own the air and add-ons. Their trade program brings competitive commissions, flexible holds, and toolkits. Go to www.weroad.com/welcome-travel-advisor. Planning your next trip abroad? Stay connected the smart way with Olafly, the global leader in eSIMs for travelers. With coverage in over 200 destinations and a 4.6 out of 5 Trustpilot rating, Olafly is the go-to for international travel. Forget fumbling with SIM cards. Olafly's eSIM activates instantly with a QR code. You'll be online in just 2 minutes with unlimited data and no surprise roaming charges. Whether it's a short getaway, frequent business travel, or life as a digital nomad, Olafly has a plan for you. Get started today at esim.olafly.com. That's esim.olafly.com.
And now, back to the show. One of the things I wanted to understand with product. So you are so critical to so many suppliers around the world. So many companies rely on Viator as their main source of business. And so those relationships I know is so important. David King, who's a good friend of mine and a great colleague of yours and friend of yours, I'm sure also, but who's based in Chicago. He's obviously so critical to the supply chain and bringing on new partners and getting them onboarded onto the platform. And so so tell us a little bit about, as you mentioned, people are always going to want to go to the Eiffel Tower, but there is also this strong desire with concerns about over-tourism, about going to off-the-beaten-path destinations. And literally, that was Lonely Planet's USP for all that time. But the reality, and I still laugh at this because you and I both being marketers, is like, people love the idea of off the beaten path destinations, but once it's in a Lonely Planet guidebook, it's no longer off the beaten path. It's literally on the path. And all of a sudden it's going to get overwhelmed. And that's what often happens in tourism. So how do you look at bringing on new destinations, especially as a marketer, when your team is looking at new destinations to expand to around the world? How do you make sure that you have a really, not only just comprehensive, but really compelling offerings, and especially things that are unique?
I think that's a really tough question. I think the answer is probably we let the traveler tell us what they want. So we always ensure that we're offering what travelers want. And for us, that is almost always a combination of, yes, the really unique products that get all the attention, like the perfume making in Paris, but it's also the core stuff, like getting up the Eiffel Tower and getting on the Seine River cruise. So there's two ways really in how we do this. And the biggest one is that a lot of this stuff happens organically at a scale like ours. It comes together organically because we've built ourselves that way. We are an open marketplace. And if you are a guide or an operator and you've got a product that meets our quality and listing standards, we will list you. We will put you on Viator. We will put you on TripAdvisor. We will distribute you through our partners. And from there, we let basic economic principles of supply and demand or capitalism, or however you want to look at it, we let it do its thing. If you are a great product that people want, it will move up sort, it will get more exposure, it will get more bookings, and it will attract competition, and you will start to see that category pick up steam. I think a really good example of that is food tours. Food tours were growing, and everyone loved a food tour, but around the mid-2010s, they became such a big thing. It was, there was interest in it in nearly all of our top destinations. We went from maybe 2 or 3 products in a destination to 10 or 20 almost overnight. And that is what you see happen. The market tells you, hey, these food tours are awesome. People start listing their food tours. They start doing very well. The market starts seeing that these things are doing well, and more and more products start to crop up. And now we're 10 years on from that, and food tours for our last 10 years have been amongst our fastest growing category. So maybe that's a slightly unsatisfying answer, but honestly, capitalism solves for a lot of this, and we have built a marketplace that can respond to that. However, we don't always just leave it to market forces. We do some things proactively. So we look at our own data, which we have a lot of between TripAdvisor and Viator, and we also work, as most OTAs do, very closely with Google. So we look at what destinations and categories are popping, and if we think there's something happening in the market that we don't have an answer for, we will go out and proactively build that supply. And that is part of what Dave's team does. They go out and make sure that if there's trends popping up that aren't sort of like market forces are not forcing them into the ecosystem, we will go out and find that demand. And yeah, from there, again, even when it's proactive, we go out and we let the market do its thing. As reviews and great experiences pile in, a product will earn more exposure through great performance. And the more travelers it pleases, the more attention it gets. And it's a bit of a flywheel.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And this is where someone like yourself who has access to that data, not only, you're obviously looking at Google search data, but the data that you have on your platform is just so powerful to be able to understand what people are searching for, right? It is a huge incumbent advantage, especially in the age of AI. You've got a great brand and you've got access to lots of data. And those things can obviously really propel you forward to be able to customize, personalize. And so, the one thing I wanted just to talk about as well, given we were highlighting some of the emerging trends as you have called them out, I was actually going through your travel trends report for 2025 before our call. And to underscore your point about food tourism, because that certainly has been on the rise, especially post-pandemic. There's a question I definitely have for you there. But when we think about food tourism, what I found really interesting is that on your top 5 best rated experiences, chocolate tours and cooking classes are right up there within the first 5. And then things like crafts, like things that people like, and then dance lessons. And like one of the big trends that I've certainly post-pandemic is this idea of passion travel, that people are traveling based on their interests. So people had that time to figure out what they're going to do if they're home alone, and then yoga, various things. And then they've gone back out to the world and they've sought out these experiences. So tell us, what are some of the biggest trends you've been seeing and what stood out to you from that report? Because there's certain things where I'm like, of course, Japan. And then of course, like Scandinavia, like there's certain destinations, but there's specific things in there that I'm just like, oh, that's really interesting. That's very unique to Viator, like concerts. The fact that you guys sell all these, Christmas concerts so tell us a little bit of some of the trends that you are paying attention to, given what information you have access to.
There are a couple of trends that just dominate over the years. Well, there's exactly two trends that have dominated over the years. The first is that the bread and butter of this category, as much as we say all this experiential stuff is growing so quickly, it is, but the bread and butter of this category is the like quite traditional tours and activities tourism. So famous things to do in famous places will always, maybe I shouldn't say always, but at least for now, dominates as absolutely the biggest part of the category and the thing that people want most. The things that are growing fastest are really quite different, and that's what you're referring to. So passion tourism, I think, is a great way to put it. But the very, very sort of like personal experiential things, cooking classes, dance classes, lessons, crafts, art, all of these things are the categories that are growing the fastest and have been growing the fastest for probably the last 4 or 5 years. And I think the clearest one coming out of the pandemic is outdoor experiences. So in I can't remember what year it was now, 2020 and 2021, we couldn't, like Viator's old business, our, pre-pandemic, we were sending Americans to Europe. Americans could not go to Europe in the year 2021. So they started doing different things, and they could stay in America, but they couldn't go inside. Everyone was doing things outside. And so what we found that has really hung on is Americans are traveling more around America now than they did pre-pandemic. And some of our fastest growing, top rated categories and destinations are things that allow you to get outside. So we see a lot of growth in destinations like Alaska and Utah. But beyond that, we also see growth in the categories that those destinations serve really well. So hiking, biking, walking, anything that gets you into the great outdoors. And then on top of that, they are also our top rated categories. So in general, experiences are already very highly rated. Average score is about 4.6 out of 5. But when we look at these categories, they're all getting like 4.85, 4.9 out of 5. So people are choosing these experiences. They're going to destinations where they can do it, and they are having a really, really great time and delivering absolutely rave reviews.
One of the things that you highlight there is that during the pandemic, people's behavior shifted. They were, stuck at home and they started exploring their own backyard. But the part that I find fascinating is that people continue to travel. They find new destinations. They find interesting new things to do. One of the things I'm keen to know from your perspective is what sources you pay attention to outside of travel. Because I often find that some of the most valuable information is not looking at what our competitors are doing, but it's looking at geopolitics and understanding interest rates and, pressures on consumers. So what are some of the other things that you gravitate to leading a successful company to ensure that it is a durable space and that people will still continue to travel or choose Viator despite other concerns they might have.
Yeah, I think it's really important. When you're leading a large team and you're leading a large revenue stream, you can't only be looking inward. You need to understand the environment that you exist in. Like, really important to be looking. My job as a VP is to be looking 2 years down the road, not 2 weeks down the road. So I wake up every morning and I listen to 5 or 6 podcasts, and I make sure that I'm getting a really broad view of international and American news. So probably the most important thing I listen to is the FT, which makes sure that I am getting outside of American news and really understanding what's happening in the world with, like how might this impact the source markets that we look at expanding into? How might we look at these things as we consider diversification? Is there like an FX issue coming up? All kinds of things anyway. So I really, really, really prioritize understanding what's going on in the world, because travel is just so highly exposed to the macro. You need to know how comfortable consumers are. You need to know what destinations they may not be going to. You need to understand what's happening in search, and is Google catching up to OpenAI in terms of LLM experiences. So incredibly important to pay attention to the world around you. And I think the more senior you get, the more important that gets. And as I said, it is my job to look 2 years out. It's probably the director's job to look 1 year out, and it's the teams to be looking 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks out. So everyone's got information they need to be paying very, very close attention to. And I think at the leadership team level, it's really important that you are doing everything you can to understand the environment you're operating in, so you can build a business that can withstand whichever headwinds might be coming your way.
For sure. And to make that point, obviously, just to add to that rather, is that one of the big developments is Airbnb reintroducing experiences. And so you have to think, and I'm sure you guys have had these same conversations, or you're in a similar viewpoint, is the fact that, when you look at the pressures of a company like Airbnb, they are constantly looking for growth, and they're under pressure in the accommodation sector, given some of the concerns about over-tourism and some of the pushback they're getting. And they can see the results of other companies like Viator in this space and how experiences, and obviously they struggled with their first iteration. And so, and I have some views on that, and I'm keen to get your take as much as you can say, because obviously I know they're a competitor, but at the same time, I asked Tao this question because I know our listeners, I'm always being mindful of what our listeners, because they'll text me afterwards to say, you didn't ask Laurel about Airbnb. And so I definitely need to ask you about it for our listeners, but I'm also genuinely curious to get your take on it, because what I said to Tao, as the listeners heard, is that when my background in like touring and river cruise, and like if another player enters the market and starts saturating the airwaves with advertising, it lifts the category, like it expands the category. And I've seen some of the great new Airbnb commercials and some of the branding they're doing. And although they struggled the first time, they're very committed to making this successful in their second pass at introducing experiences. What is your take on them re-entering this space?
I think you can look at Airbnb and Google in similar ways. So both have made big plays at experiences beginning about a decade ago, and both, just like the OTAs, have really struggled to find their perfect footing. So I think what we take from this is, yes, there is so much opportunity in this category, but it is not a foregone conclusion that just because you are big and successful and you have funding, you will succeed. Airbnb has changed their value proposition a couple of times. Google has changed their value proposition a couple of times. And what you conclude from that is there is a lot of opportunity. It is so worthwhile going after, but it's also just not that easy. So I think what I would say about Airbnb is, yes, it points to the challenges of the category. It also points to the opportunity of the category. This is, like a $350 billion category. There is room for a lot of different value propositions in here. And that value proposition is different. It's very unique. It's very niche. Where we sit is we are a product, or we are a storefront that if you are going anywhere in the world, you can do the things that you absolutely would have on your list. So if you are, I suppose the example I keep pointing to is Paris. If you are going to Paris for the first time, there is no way you are not going up the Eiffel Tower. There is no way you're not taking a Sun River cruise. We will offer you that. And we will also offer you the niche experiences that are similar to I'm sure the conversations you've had recently, but we will offer the dessert making classes and the perfume making classes. So it's kind of the full experience that we offer, which goes back to our true competitive advantage of catalog. Kind of no matter who you are or where you're going, we have the greatest breadth of selection, and we can really serve any trip. So that's, I think, what sets us apart. But what I would say about players like Google and Airbnb entering the category is, yeah, it points to what is such a vast opportunity, and it also points to what is such a vast challenge. And you also make a very good point about this category is still like 4 out of every $5 on experiences doesn't touch the internet yet. And having entrants like this who are advertising and reminding people that you can come online to book these things and there's a single place to search and sort and book, it's, competition is not, it's not all bad. Bringing attention to the category is a very, very good thing, especially when you have the confidence that Viator has, which is that we know we offer a great solution. And as more travelers come online, we feel pretty good about our ability to serve them.
Yeah, what's really interesting about what you say there is like operations and product, which are obviously two critical aspects to Viator in terms of the platform, but also the operators you work with, the relationships. And one of the things I just call out to our listeners, one of the things that I have spoken about and when I've talked on stage about Airbnb experiences or been asked about it, one of the big challenges when you look at a company like them entering this space with the success they had with hosts as a concept within accommodation, that worked perfectly. That you had a host or super host that would, manage one or multiple properties, and it doesn't apply. That model is not easily replicated in travel because it's difficult to scale. So it's one thing to have people stay on your couch or, in your spare room, but it's a very different thing to take someone to do sword making in Tokyo, because that sword maker may only be available twice a week and can only take 8 people. And it's like that. So there's also the frustration and disappointment. You and I both know from working in travel for many years, it's about your ability to scale and be profitable and be able to have consistency, that there's 12 tours running every day and you can pick the time that works for you. And there's a consistent experience with the delivery of each of those. And that's what consumers are looking for. So that's one thing I definitely see as a big challenge for any of those technology companies entering the space that are like literally saying, we're a technology company, not a travel company. And it's like, well, you kind of need to understand hospitality and all the different aspects of. So one other thing I want to ask you on the same topic is AI, and I'm not just throwing out AI because, of course, yes, we need to talk about it. But the reason I wanted to bring it up as it relates to what we're discussing now is because one of the biggest disruptions that I certainly see, and I'm sure you have some strong views on this as well, is that the consumer journey is changing by virtue of AI. So that whole concept of people doing search, like Google results, going to websites and then doing their research and then booking, even though, as you said, only $4 to $5 are spent online, which is a whole other thing for connectivity. But at the same time, consumers are now using OpenAI or ChatGPT or any number of these generative AI platforms to do research. The numbers are astounding, which is why we're doing our AI summit to really understand how consumer behavior is now changing in the face of AI. And I see that some of the intermediaries are more likely to be disrupted than the operators, because at the end of the day, you still need to find that operator or go up the Eiffel Tower. That experience at the end of the line is still the same. How you found out about it, how you learned more about it, how you booked it, that whole consumer journey is definitely going to change. So Viator being a pipe, if you will, for all of this amazing 400,000 tours, that's a huge competitive advantage that you have. And it's part of what I'd say is the moat around Viator, that you have all that product. So you can make it available through any means for consumers to find it, discover and book. So, but one of the things I do see is like with TripAdvisor, people used to do their research, but people are still going to validate the hotels. They're still going to validate, they want reviews from other people to give them the confidence that this is going to be a great experience. But very keen to know what your view is with AI coming in so strongly. How do you think that's changing the user journey?
Yeah.
And I guess, how are you factoring that into how you and your team are approaching this new technology?
We think about it all day, every day. I mean, it's no surprise that the travel industry is like very much in bed with Google. Travelers, by and large, no matter what the trip, will almost always touch Google at some point. So almost all of us market heavily on Google. And we've all been talking about this shift to AI surfaces on Google, so AIOs and AI mode, as well as ChatGPT, Perplexity, et al. Over the last year or so. What is actually really surprising is it is not changing as quickly as you think it would. And I when I think about this, I think about 2 parts of the traveler journey. So I think about upper funnel and research, and then I think about lower funnel and conversion. Upper funnel and research, absolutely. AIOs are showing up. They're looking on AI surfaces. They're having long conversations. They're getting their research done, and their needs met in ways that are just so much better than the old 10 blue links. I actually, you look back on that now, it was only a year ago, but I actually can't believe that as consumers, we all accepted that experience for as long as we did. It's just really not good. So that stuff is very much shifting to AIOs and to AI surfaces now. And what we find, though, is that as much as some of that demand is being absorbed into AIOs, and in every industry, probably there's going to be pressure on traffic there, when that traffic lands on your site, they convert hard and fast. They are ready to book because their questions have been answered so much better than they would have been answered by surfing around through 110 different links as they would have done a year ago. So yeah, there's probably going to be pressure on traffic there, but there's a trade-off in that your consumer now, when they're reading that, they get to you, they are so highly educated and they are ready to book. So that's one part of it. The second part is where we see demand with really clear and commercial intent. That demand is still flowing unobstructed into SEM, and it's SEM being paid links. It's not really hard to imagine why. I mean, this is like Google's bread and butter, hundreds of billions of dollars. It's like the GDP of a medium-sized country goes through these ads. And they are probably going to protect that with their life. And so where demand is clear and commercial and it's very low funnel and people are ready to convert, we see that coming straight through on SEM, kind of just as it always did. And that comes through in our earnings. So where the rest of the world is actually like kind of quite pressured on consumer sentiment and consumer spend, you see that in earnings on, Target, Starbucks, McDonald's, whatever it is. Growth year over year is it's quite pressured for those categories. For experiences, it's still growing quite quickly. We were double digits on items last quarter. We are still seeing that demand. So I think we see two things. One is that demand for this category is extremely durable and resilient. And even in times of economic headwinds, people will still choose to spend here. And Google is not getting in the way of that right now. All of that demand is still coming through on SEM, which is, how travelers are quite comfortable shopping for experiences. Will it always be that way? I mean, it's hard to say. I'm guessing absolutely not. But probably what will happen is that there is a lot of commercial demand that comes through search. And while it might not look the same as it does now, capitalism is capitalism. And that demand will be protected, and it might shapeshift a little, and things might look quite different. But it's easy to assume that search will continue to be an important part of the travel experience going forward. And we really do obsess over this, and we are scenario planning and have 10 or 12 different outcomes in mind, and we monitor the signals to see which way it's going. So far, it's still looking quite strong, but we will be as ready as we can be for whatever comes next. And it's an incredibly interesting time to be in marketing.
We'll be right back.
In a world of endless travel options, how do you guarantee quality? The answer is curation, and it's the core of Civitatis, the leading marketplace for global tours and activities. Instead of just more options, their promise is more quality. Their experts handpick the best from over 90,000 activities in 4,000 destinations worldwide, ensuring every tour meets the highest standards of quality, availability, and price. They focus this winning strategy on capturing the world's fastest growing customer market, travelers from Latin America. By connecting these travelers to their global portfolio of experiences in native Spanish or Portuguese, Civitatis creates the powerful customer loyalty your business can count on. Their model is a proven formula for generating massive demand and driving industry-leading conversion. For the travel trade, the message is clear. Partnering with Civitatis is your strategy for capturing the massive outbound Latin American market and turning their growth into your revenue. Visit Civitatis.com for more details. Today, 65% of travel queries trigger an AI overview. If your brand isn't showing up there, you're losing bookings. It's that simple. This is the new reality that Propellic, the AI-first digital marketing agency for travel, helps brands master. Their entire focus is on delivering what matters, performance bookings, not just clicks. They've done the research on how AI is changing everything from search to purchase. You can find their groundbreaking new report right on their website. While you're there, join over 1,000 travel marketers by subscribing to their newsletter, The Navlog. Stay ahead of the curve. Visit Propellic.com. Travel has changed, but many multi-day tour operators are still stuck with spreadsheets and disconnected systems. Today's travelers expect more choice, flexibility, unforgettable experiences without the friction. That's where Captio comes in. Built on Salesforce, Captio is the modern platform designed specifically for multi-day tour operators. From tailor-made trips to group tours, rail to river, we bring your itineraries, bookings, payments, and operations together in one seamless system. With automation, real-time inventory, and supplier integrations, we make complex travel simple so you can do what you do best. Serve travelers, not spreadsheets. Check out Captio.com for more details.
And now, back to the show. When it comes to Viator and some of the other technology and some of the advancements you're making, I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing us kind of what's on your roadmap in the next 6 to 12 months. And I know you're a publicly traded company, so I know you need to be mindful of, and I'm not asking for any forward projections, in terms of what you can share about what's coming up with some of the leveraging some of the technology, because as you highlighted, it's never been more exciting to be a marketer giving the tools, the technology we have. You and I obviously have a great friend in common named Brendan Bliss, who runs Propellic. He's a great supporter of our podcast and has been really since the beginning. And he's a great friend as well. And him and I have terrific conversations as you do with him about what's the state. He's literally transformed his business from an SEO agency into an AI optimization agency in quick succession, is having great success, and full credit to him because he's helping companies navigate this exact challenge, is that your SEO traffic has fallen off and you're trying, how do you optimize your discovery and exposure for Gen AI platforms? And this is a business unto itself now. And it's really, I couldn't agree with you more. It's so exciting. So given all of these shifts, what are some of the things you guys are looking to build out on the platform? What are some of the things we can look forward to Viator rolling out over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. The most exciting innovation is the value proposition in and of itself. As we talked about earlier, $4 to $5 in this category still spent offline, which is crazy in the year 2025. So the real innovation is taking a highly fragmented shopping experience in which a consumer couldn't or can't really get a handle on what's on offer in their destination, and giving them a clear read, Viator being that clear read with a really simple path to booking that experience. So that probably is the most exciting thing that we're doing, which is, I'm basically saying the whole business, but it's getting the catalog right and making it as accessible and bookable as possible, whether you're like going kayaking down the Colorado River, taking a Harry Potter walking tour in London, whatever it may be, making sure that you can find what you want, you know that it's right for you, it's right for your destination, and we can book it really quickly. The R&D work or the marketing work that is underneath all of that is, dare I say, incredibly unsexy, because it's about taking that very innovative value proposition and making it simple. And simple is pretty unsexy. So this is work that's about smoothing out the shopping process. It's about having flexible traveler policies. It's about removing friction from the booking flow, getting clear on logistics, getting clear on cancellation policies. It's not like one big swing. The big swing is taking this highly fragmented shopping experience and making it accessible. And then it's all these little things that are underneath it that really are, as I say, they are kind of unsexy. And I think the lesson there is that piling up, we're reaching a point of maturity here with this business, but piling up these small incremental wins and having a real focus on solving consumer problems that range in size from, small to medium, it can be extremely powerful. And if you listen to our earnings calls recently, you'll hear Matt and Mike talk about the conversion wins that we've had. And there's nothing more powerful than that. Conversion is your consumer telling you, you've met my needs, thank you very much. And all of these small things are contributing to that. So the big swing is the value proposition. And then there's 100 small projects between our marketing team and our R&D team that are all aiming at one thing, which is take problems out of the flow. And they're doing that very well.
Well, one thing I think you guys would have a clear incumbent strength in is matchmaking, given not only the TripAdvisor, but just Viator on its own, even the fact that you know what people have booked before and you can serve up recommendations to them. And this true idea of personalized one-to-one messaging that you and I have kind of grown up in the industry, attempting to reach that holy grail where you can actually speak to someone directly rather than sending out a generic newsletter to say, here's a bunch of stuff that we think a few 100,000 people might be interested in learning about, as opposed to having something that's truly personalized. Something else you said that's also really insightful, and I just wanted to make sure all of our listeners took that away, was the fact that when Gen AI traffic gets to your site or gets to reach your business, they're ready to convert. They've done their research. And Travel AI, one of our partners as well, travelai.com, John Leotier, who's been on our podcast, he continually posts on LinkedIn, and he's willing to share this information despite the fact in many ways he'd rather just keep it to himself and benefit from this knowledge, but he's been open about sharing it because he wants to see if this is other people's experience as well, that we're seeing a dramatically higher conversion rate. So you've kind of got this thing where new customers are coming to you knowing exactly what they want to buy. And you also have existing customers that you know a lot about and can make recommendations. So I'm genuinely curious, when you look at that matching problem, because this is one of the things, to bring up Airbnb again with Brian Chesky, one of the things for sure I totally agree with him on is that we don't have a search problem, we have a matching problem. And so the idea of trying to match people's interests to specific travel opportunities. So just generally curious, given you're such a smart, clever, and experienced marketer, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this challenge that we have today and how companies can start to realize it, and what maybe you guys are doing there to better match offers to consumer interests.
It's an absolutely massive challenge, and it exists both off-site and on-site. So off-site, I think we're actually getting quite strong at that, and a lot of that is down to how quickly ad tech has progressed in the last few years. So advertising on Meta a few years ago, I mean, it wasn't great. The returns were pretty tough to swallow, but the targeting is getting much better. The tooling you can put against that to speak to consumers on a one-to-one basis rather than a 1 to 1 million, and you can do it in real time. I mean, you can respond to a traveler behavior and serve them up a different image, a different value proposition, and a different call to action. It's really come a long way, and we see that in our numbers. So off-site, between our capabilities and just how good ad tech is getting, we're making a lot of progress there. On-site, we're also making a lot of progress. That is where, it gets pretty tricky. 400,000 products, huge amounts of data, huge amounts of consumers. We are making real progress there. We see that showing up in our conversion numbers. And I think what's really exciting about this is we've only just kind of scratched the surface of the true competitive advantage, which is combining TripAdvisor and Viator data to have this real 360 view of the traveler. We are actively building that out now and trying to figure out how we can better predict and serve what they're going to do next in a way that others in the category might not be able to, because they don't have the benefit of being a part of a multi-vertical OTA with more information on the traveler. So that's the kind of way that we're looking at matching. There is obviously once you're inside the Viator environment, we can take steps to serve you really well, but we have this huge competitive advantage in TripAdvisor data, which tells us more about a traveler than others might know, and we should be able to personalize and serve and convert quicker and faster than others. And we are only just scratching the surface of that, and it's something we're pretty excited about.
No, that is really exciting, and this certainly highlights just how much disruption, and that's why it's definitely an exciting time for us to be in the space and for our listeners to be solving some of the latest challenges with technology and marketing and messaging and coming up with really innovative solutions and I think most organizations now, Booking.com being a great example with Glenn Fogel, very focused on AI and because they're a technology business and they can be disrupted by any number of startups, especially ones that can compete in the user journey, and that's very much open competition now. So one of the things if we look forward, I know some companies have their 2030 view, like Intrepid and others and some of our partners, and you guys have, as you mentioned, you're always very forward looking, at least kind of 2 years out. Give us some guidance of where you think what the industry will look like in the next few years. And what I mean by that is, obviously, it's one of those things. I know the old cliche saying that you're very familiar with as well, like people underestimate what's going to happen. They overestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term. And certainly there's always these things that, like, as much as we have these innovations, human behavior will, people will still want to go to Rome and New York and Paris, right? It's just like,
yeah.
But again, here's a fascinating stat that, like, in 10 years, 80% of homes may have humanoid robots in them. So it's like, what does that mean for our livelihood? So, like, things are going to change as companies like Tesla roll them out, and they're now available in China for 8,000 versus 30,000. And so there's so many things that are very difficult to predict that certainly could play a role. But what are some of the things that you're paying attention to or thinking about how the industry will evolve in the next few years, let's say?
Yeah, I think in the nearer term, something we're probably all coming to terms with is that the industry, the experiences category, is not moving online organically as quickly as we thought. So we're probably going to need to take some steps to move that along. And maybe part of this is that we've all been looking at the SAM, the serviceable addressable market, as the whole thing, as saying, like, this 300 and some odd $1 billion category, we should be able to access all of that. But I think we took a really sort of tech company heavy view to that, assuming that if we made the booking process simple, travelers would come online. And I think kind of something we all forgot about is that, and there's hubris here from the tech companies, we all sort of forgot that travelers or consumers are not always solving for simplicity. Sometimes other things are more important. Like, we don't all use Instacart because sometimes we want to make sure the avocado is not as hard as a brick before we buy it. And even though it would be so much easier to get it delivered, there is something else you're optimizing for. And so I think part of it is that we assumed every dollar could be brought online. I would suggest now that there's some spontaneity that travelers really want to retain, or some flexibility. You know, you want to work around your cranky toddler. You need to account for a hangover. Like, you don't want to be scheduled up to your eyeballs when you go on vacation. You want to leave some room for flexibility. So I think we probably need to accept that the whole thing's not going to come online, and it's not coming online as quickly as we thought it would. It's, you know, there's a lot of growth. It's moving pretty quickly, but we probably need to better understand what happens in a destination, and to start disintermediating some of those behaviors and doing what we can to bring them online. OTAs are fighting OTAs right now, and there's a whole huge world of offline bookings that we need to better understand and figure out how to better serve. I do truly believe there's a chunk of them we'll never access, but $4 to $5 are still spent offline, and I think we've got to look outside the growing pool of OTAs and start to figure out how to make that organic process. Well, I guess make it non-organic. How to make that process move a little bit faster. So I think there's got to be more done on the in-destination traveler and figuring out what is going to drive people from offline to online, and probably stop assuming that it's all going to happen organically. I think that that's the near term one. Medium term, I guess probably not specific to experiences, but like you see it at the conferences now, people are talking a lot more about India as the next big market than they are talking about China. We all spent the last 20 years talking about China, but India is just such a fascinating market. Inbound, they have really supportive travel policies. It's an incredible country, and it's getting progressively easier to move around. So I think we'll start to see that as a much more popular destination. But more interesting is outbound. You've got a really fast growing middle class with money to spend. Again, really supportive policies on travel, on outbound, on moving people around. And I think it's going to be a market we all obsess over and try to figure out. And probably a lot of us will not do it very well, because we all know American companies are not great at internationalization. But I think that'll be, it already is. I think that's going to be the big thing that we're all talking about at conferences from now until, I don't know, let's say 2035.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see who does really well at it.
For sure. And you bring up another really important point there, which is, and you know these stats, I'm keen to ask you this, which is when travelers are planning a trip, obviously there's a certain percentage of travelers that book in advance, and then other people that book in destination. What does that look like today for Viator? Because I got another question I want to ask you, but I want to understand that first. So what percentage of travelers are booking in destination versus booking in advance of their trip?
It's growing very, so I mean, we've got selection bias because we've got, like, by nature, people who use Viator are planners. The in-destination group is growing very, very quickly. I don't know the numbers offhand, but it's a large and growing number. The majority are planning quite far in advance, and the degree to which they plan in advance really is very closely correlated to how far they're going and how much they're spending. So Americans traveling within the US typically book 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Americans traveling to Europe typically book 30 to 40 days in advance, and beyond that, they're booking, like, 2-3 months in advance. So very closely correlated to what they're spending and how far they're going, and the in-destination group is large and growing.
Interesting. Well, and obviously I'll have a look to, because one of the things I've seen you guys do quite effective marketing in destination. Like when I was in London, you guys have people on the street promoting, selling Viator tickets. And like, it's a real clever, because so many people are in London and they're trying to decide what they're going to do. They ask their concierge, or they happen to see the hop on, hop off buses. And so obviously you want to know people in destination can also book with Viator. You don't have to book before you traveled. But the reason I wanted to ask this specific question, because, and we can make this kind of the last big point we discuss, and then I've got a few rapid fire questions for you that I'm also keen to ask and finish off on. But I think this is a really interesting topic for all of our listeners thinking about where they can grow their businesses in 2025 and beyond, or 2026 and beyond now, really, is that when you look at destinations, you mentioned India. One of the other ones that stands out to me is Africa. We had a gentleman on our show, Charles Shima, who runs a company called Tourafik. Really fascinating guy. He's Rwandan, Canadian, and his whole business model is based on the idea that people are going to start to feel more comfortable traveling to Africa as independent travelers and booking experiences. Rwanda is one of those destinations you would not today, with someone with little experience or knowledge, fly into with the hopes of trying to figure it out as you go. You'll do that to Europe because you're going to find a place to roam. Like, it's set up, the infrastructure's in place. So I'd love to hear your take on that. So you mentioned India as opposed to, because China obviously is a huge outbound market that still hasn't fully come back. This is where it excites me so much when you think about all these different moving factors. So yeah, so in terms of in-destination booking experiences, where do you see? So India and potentially Africa, at least from
Africa's a really interesting one. I'll send it to you after this. I just listened to a podcast on this the other day from Bloomberg on the luxury market and how quickly it's growing in Africa. And the argument they're making is that it's growing incredibly rapidly, but this is a segment that's paying like $20,000, $30,000 a night. And I think it's making the point that you just made, which is that the reason this is happening is because the infrastructure isn't there yet. So it's these huge brands that are going in and effectively building the tourism industry there. And once that's set up, and these are companies that have the money to build the infrastructure that's not in existence yet. Once that's set up, we'll then start to see mid-range, budget range travelers going. But I'll send it to you. It's really interesting. And it does seem like that's the way it's going. There's a huge spike in interest for luxury travel in Africa. And that will then give rise to mid-range, budget range. And probably in the next 5 or 10 years, we'll start to see more happening there, and probably people coming down from $10,000, $20,000 a night to just the average traveler. And, Africa becomes one of the next big destinations.
For sure. And there's one company called Cloud Safaris that we've had on our podcast as well. And this is where I find it so fascinating. We have large organizations and startups and learning from each other and shaping the future of our industry, where they're kind of betting on the fact that more people also will be comfortable just booking direct with suppliers in Africa, as opposed to it just being a destination for ultra high net worth individuals that go and stay at these incredible game lodges. And so there is a market there, but I'm excited to see the independent traveler break out in places like India and in Africa. So anyway,
it'll happen. Like the thing, I remember going to Vietnam when I was in my early 20s and my parents being amazed, like to them, because of when they grew up, they could not have ever imagined ever going to Vietnam. And there I was going, booking it on my own with my, 22-year-old best friend, having the time of our lives. It just takes a bit of time for these economies to become accessible to the average traveler. And maybe we're 10 or 15 years off from that in Africa. But the same way my parents were totally blown away when I was going to Vietnam, maybe my daughter Nina will be, heading off to Namibia when she's 25, and I'll be completely amazed by it.
Or Iraq or Iran, for example. Like those are because I was recently going to do a trip to Iraq, and the operator was assuring me of the safety and other guests that have gone, and I couldn't believe how much travel there actually is to Iraq already that you don't even hear about. That are but so some of those intrepid travelers, and you're absolutely spot on. I couldn't agree more with Thailand, Vietnam, the whole Southeast Asia. 20 years ago was a completely different experience, and having gone back more recently, you can see it's just it's the prices are comparable to most typical popular destinations. And, for me, then I gravitate to places like Colombia, which are, I see as a destination that, look like Thailand did 20 years ago, where it's the infrastructure is more or less in place. The people are lovely. The costs are so reasonable. So on this is actually literally the very first rapid fire question I had for you, which is, Laurel, based on all your experience and exposure, personal travel, and seeing all the data, what do you think is actually the most underrated travel destination?
Can I give you overrated instead?
Okay, perfect. Give me both. Yeah, exactly. So
I'll give you overrated, and I feel like this is super controversial, and I'm going to offend a lot of people. I hate going to New York. I think I could love living there, but I find the intensity of it so exhausting, and I am always so happy to leave when I go. So that would be my overrated. Again, could live there, but as a traveler to New York, I find it tough.
So I genuinely do love New York, and so I'll balance it out for our listeners, because I do love New York. But the interesting thing is New York holding up as one of despite tourism to the U.S. being down from international destinations, given some of these geopolitical factors, New York has been holding up. It was literally looking at some of the data. It was the only U.S. city that was still had growth figures. So the fact, as far as being overrated, like people still want to go. They want to go to New York. Despite
I mean,
things, right? It's
you can't help but marvel at it. It's amazing, but my God, I just want to nap for 4 days when I get back from New York.
Fair enough. All right. So underrated. What's below the radar that you're going to say right now, and all of a sudden, EasyJet's going to open up a direct flight and and totally.
Oh, do you know what? I don't think I have a good answer to underrated. Can I get back to you?
Of course you can, yeah. So my underrated is definitely Colombia. Like it was like, I still hear people, like because of the perception of a destination, to your point about Vietnam, people still identify like FARC guerrillas and narcos. And it's like, I see it hanging over the heads of the people that promote Colombia as a destination, that people are like, the first thing, is it safe? Isn't it like where all the cocaine comes from? Like, it's just like, and literally, I had been to every country in South America, almost, with the exception of Colombia. And I finally got to Colombia and I was like, oh my God, I've been missing out. So that for me is underrated.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that because I'm thinking about going next year.
Perfect. I've got some suggestions for you. So not only will we share some things with each other, we'll also make sure all of our listeners, the articles you share with me and some of the places that you can find out more about Viator's research, I'll be sharing that at the end of the episode. But I've got a couple more rapid fire questions and then we'll close off for our listeners. But I've been so enjoying this conversation. So the next rapid fire question, what's the one item you would never travel without? And this is not, obviously your daughter whenever you can, but like, what is the one item? Let's go business travel. So you're in London right now. What's the one item when you were going out the door that you would not leave without?
The sound of snoring makes me incandescent with rage. So if I'm taking an overnight flight, I have a sleep mask that has little speakers in it that like lie over my ears, because no one wants to sleep with AirPods in, that lie over my ears, and I put on background noise like a river or a stream or a babbling brook, whatever it is, so that I cannot hear 20 people around me snoring.
That's a good tip.
Can't live without it. Cannot live without it. Yep.
Okay. Good tip and totally unique. Favorite travel app? Like besides Viator, anything that's within your, current remit. What else do you use when you're traveling? What's a handy tool or an app that you love?
I won't be super cringe and say TripAdvisor. I'll say Airbnb, mostly because there are a few things in life that give me more joy than being able to do laundry on holiday.
Exactly. That's folks. I'm sure Airbnb will be thrilled to hear that. And that's where I feel like in our industry, there's certain people that they're not, you work at Viator, you've got this great role there, but like the reality is we use all sorts of different platforms and we'll continue to. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's not like a hard, Airbnb. I love traveling with Airbnb as well, but I also love luxury boutique hotels when I can. So I'm a huge fan of boutique hotels. All right. Now, if you weren't working at Viator, if your life trajectory did not go the way that you weren't in Boston at Viator, where do you think you'd be and what might you be doing?
I'd be a journalist, I think, if they would have had me. But I love reading and writing. Very interested in the world. Listening to the news is one of my greatest passions. I would be delighted to be a journalist, or would have been delighted to be a journalist.
Cool. And then last question, I know you've got a young daughter and your husband's English. And so you've got this international perspective based in Boston. But when it comes to your next personal trip or your next, the next place you desire going, I know we just talked about Colombia, but what's at the top of your short list of destinations you're very keen to get to?
Well, my daughter is quite obsessive about volcanoes, and American Thanksgiving is coming up. As discussed, I'm Canadian, so we don't do a ton in the US. She'll be out of school. I am taking her on a mother-daughter holiday, and I think we're going to do a self-drive for 6 days around Iceland, and I am just really, really hoping that I don't find myself changing a tire in, Arctic freezing temperatures at 2:00 in the morning with nothing around for miles. I'm a little nervous, but it'll be great. So Iceland is the next place that I'm going.
Very cool. You're absolutely going to love it. Iceland's an amazing destination. I definitely have some suggestions for you there. I've been there a few times and I've got some great friends and colleagues there. The company at Capdio that I work with closely with a K, they are based in Iceland, Ragnar. And I've got a huge fascination with Iceland, and if you want volcanoes, that's definitely the place to go. So your daughter's going to love it.
Oh yeah, well, we want volcanoes. We talk about volcanoes all the time. Lots of YouTube videos on volcanoes.
Oh, that's fantastic. One last question, and then we'll wrap up. Is that given our conversation started with your career, and again calling you out, which I firmly believe as a captain of industry. I know you're not comfortable with that term, but there are certain people that, and this is when I created this podcast to speak to people who were myself from like 15, 20 years ago when I was working at Lonely Planet and coming up in the industry, the people I wanted to listen to, learn from, and then apply in my role. So if you could say to your younger self, when you were just working at that PR agency in London doing listicles and not knowing what the future hold, what advice would you give to yourself now in your career that might be valuable to other listeners?
I wish I'd learned much earlier on to care so much less about what people think of you. I was afraid of my own shadow for the first 10 or 12 years of my career. And when you're junior, those instincts are probably quite helpful because, the thing telling you maybe don't speak up sometimes is probably right. But I was just I was so nervous. I was so afraid to speak my mind. And sort of what I've realized over the last 10 or so years is like they're not paying attention to you. Do you really? Like we could all just really benefit from caring a little bit less about what people think. No one has sat there watching you, monitoring you, and even if they are, you are in a job, you have a point of view, you are probably an expert on what you're about to speak about, and bad things are not going to happen if you just speak your mind. So I think I would have told my younger self to be less fearful of having a point of view and start sharing it earlier on.
Yeah, that's really valuable. I couldn't agree with you more. And a number of people have commented to me on the podcast. They're like, I love this new Dan Christian 2.0. Like, I remember you when you're in the corporate world, but you now seem to have a real authentic voice. And I was just like, this has always been me, but I've never been as comfortable and natural. And I think one of the things that you're clearly able to do that in a corporate role, but I never quite was able to speak in my own voice. I always felt like I needed to speak in my corporate voice or in my role. So this conversation to me has been so refreshing, and I'm sure it's been delightful for all of our listeners as well. I obviously, I'm thrilled that we know each other, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Orlando in a few weeks, depending on when people are listening to this, and Arrival likely after that. So I look forward to seeing you in person, Laurel. I value our friendship, and I look forward to seeing your continued success. So thanks so much for joining us on the podcast, and yeah, I can't wait to see you in person soon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all of the very, very kind words. I feel very undeserving, but I'm very grateful.
Thanks so much for joining us on our latest episode of Travel Trends. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Laurel Greatrix, the VP of Marketing at Viator. You can find clips and highlights from our conversation on our social channels, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn at Travel Trends Podcast. And we have one final episode in our In-Destination series, Part 2, which is brought to us in partnership with our friends at Pernod Ricard. You can learn more about their brand homes at pernod-ricard.com. Our final episode is going to feature the founder of the app GeoTourist to talk about how technology is changing the in-destination experience. And speaking of technology, we have our AI Summit coming up at the end of October, the 28th and 29th. You can find out more details at traveltrendspodcast.com and register to join us and sign up for our monthly newsletter where we send a roundup of all the latest episodes from the month and our travel plans for the next month. And you can find out where we're going to be on our events page, which includes the Focusrite Conference in San Diego in November, where if you purchase one of our tickets through our promo code, which will not only save you $250 off a ticket, it will also guarantee you a place in our event spotlight episode. So we hope that you will join us there. Until next time, safe travels.